This is NPR's Life Kit. I'm Chris Arnold, and welcome to day 2 of your personal finance tune-up. This week, we are getting you pumped to tackle those personal finance goals because I know times are tough right now, and some of you, look, you're really struggling a lot more than normal, and for reasons that are out of your hands. It's a pandemic. All of us need to give ourselves a break. And then for others of you out there, you might actually be saving more money than usual just because you can't go out to eat or the movies or bars or get on a plane and go on vacation. So there's an opportunity here for you to tackle that pile of debt that you've always wanted to get rid of. But either way, getting out of debt is never easy, and it can feel defeating and impossible even. And I actually have a perfect story to capture this feeling. It starts in a mythological landscape somewhere far, far away from your Zoom call, home work setup. It's a dreary swamp in what is now Germany. And a man named Baron Munchausen, he's riding his horse, his mighty steed. Munchausen is one of my favorites. That's Ayelet Fishback. She's a psychologist who studies human motivation. And she told me the story about the Baron because she finds it instructive about how we can do really difficult things in life. So the Baron, he gets himself into this bad situation. He rides his horse into this swamp and he starts sinking into the mud. The swamp is taking him like he's gonna die. This guy indeed got stuck in the swamp, and he basically takes his hair with his both hands and pulling himself by his hair outside of the swamp. And he's strong enough so that not only can pull himself, he can also pull the horse that he's holding between his legs. So that if you can imagine the picture, that looks quite fantastic. Now, I have to admit, when Ayelet told me the story, I could not imagine this picture. The guy with the horse and his legs and how do you pull yourself out of a swamp by your hair? Is his hair really long and he lassos a tree? It just doesn't seem to make sense. I totally didn't get it. And no, clearly physically impossible. But Ayelet says what this fable is trying to tell you is something bigger. So she and I were first talking about digging out, not from a swamp, but from a big pile of debt, and how people find the motivation to do that, to really cut back on their spending dramatically and do all the things you have to do, make really big life changes. You also in the process learn that you can pretty much apply yourself and do things that seem impossible, and you can commit to something that takes a couple of years and you can achieve it. Yeah, I think I finally get the Baron Munchausen thing with the hair. The thing is, the whole point is it's impossible to pull yourself out of a swamp by your hair, but if you are motivated and you believe in yourself, the idea is you can do the impossible, or the thing that you thought was impossible. Exactly. This is your NPR Life Kit for getting out of debt. I'm Chris Arnold. I cover personal finance and consumer protection. And in this episode, we're looking at a range of the most powerful tools and approaches. Victim 2. I hate debt. I hate it so much that if debt was a person, I would slap it. That's Michelle Singletary. She's with the Washington Post. She's a columnist and author who's written books about getting out of debt. And she works one-on-one with lots of people to help them do this too. And Michelle says because debt can be such a tricky adversary, you need a good plan to defeat it. And that's our first big takeaway here. We call it tip number 1. You absolutely need a plan. It's like anything else that you decide to do. Let's talk about driving. If you're going to a place you've never been before, now you've got GPS, you've got Google Maps, and so you plot out how you're going to get there. It's the same thing with your debt. If you don't have a plan, you're most likely going to fail. One reason a plan is so important is because it gives us a default answer to all sorts of spending decisions that pop up every day. And in the moment, it's really tempting to just spend the money if you don't have a plan in advance. It's like, it's the end of the day, I'm hungry, let's buy Chinese food. But when you decide to come up with a plan to get out of debt and you've got that plan, that makes it easier to say no to something. Okay, so we can't just wing this. We need a good plan. But what plan? Abby says the first decision you have to make here has to do with snowballs and avalanches. That sounds a little random, but those are the nicknames for 2 different approaches to attacking your debt. So with the avalanche method, we'll look at that first. Basically, you list all your debts with the highest interest rate debt at the top of the list. If you have two credit cards and one has a 13% interest rate and one has a 17% interest rate, then you put all the money you can towards paying off the 17% rate credit card first because it's charging you the highest interest rate. I mean, that makes sense, right? And you just pay the minimums on everything else. And then when you pay off that card, then you move down to the 13% card and so on and so forth. So it's like an avalanche, falling down that mountain of debts to the next highest rate, and down you go. You'll be much better off from an economic perspective, paying off that highest interest rate debt first, because essentially you'll have less total debt to have to pay off over time. So that seems pretty straight ahead and logical, but there is a wild card factor here that has to do with motivation. And Michelle explains that's where the snowball method comes in. That plan says something a little different. It says, you know what, screw the math as far as paying the highest interest rate first. If the folks who were in debt had looked at logic and math, they wouldn't be in debt in the first place. So you didn't use math to get in debt. Now you got to try to go to logic to get out of it. No, we got to look at behavior. And the snowball method is all about behavior and feeling motivated by small wins. So you make a list of all your debts, not by the interest rate, but by the balance, how much you owe. And starting with the smallest debt at the top of the list. So if that's a credit card with only $200 on it, you attack that. You go at it and pay it off, and you pay it off really quickly, and then boom, you get a win. And what the studies show is that when people have immediate progress, that they get rid of some debt, that energizes them, that encourages them. We heard from a bunch of listeners who did this, and a lot of them say it actually works, like Jason Moingen from It's Impossible. Yeah, I get that. Let me just say this, because a lot of times when financial experts say you still got to do it, people are like, well, you don't know, you don't understand. Let me tell you something. I completely understand. I was abandoned by my parents. I went to live with my grandmother. Before my grandmother took us in, I knew hunger. Like there wasn't food in the refrigerator. And I don't mean that there wasn't choices in the refrigerator. I mean there was nothing in the refrigerator. So I understand poverty at a level that some experts don't, right? I mean, my grandmother made like $13,000 the most in her life, so she couldn't give me money to help. So even as a young adult, it was all on me, starting out in my new job. And I was also helping a disabled brother. So I totally get that there's not a whole lot to stretch. I know what it's like, but I also know that you can't overspend and spend what you don't have. So if you're a young adult starting out, that means that you gotta make different decisions. All right, we're gonna go through a bunch of strategies that will help you make better decisions about money. And one big thing you can do is, look, you just have to have a budget. There's all kinds of reasons to do that, and don't be intimidated about it. Just sit down and do it. Listen, my grandmother budgeted on the back of an envelope from junk mail. Pretty simple. We've got a whole episode about how to be the master of your budget, as we call it. It's in our life kit guide called Find Money You Didn't Know You Had. And that gives you tons of good advice about what a powerful tool a budget can be. So definitely check that out. Another way to spend less is to go card less. See what I did there? As in, ditch the credit cards. Michelle says, don't close the credit card account because that'll hurt your credit score. But the cards themselves, you've got to put the cards away. Cut them up, put them in the freezer, put them in an ice tray, but you've got to take them out of your wallet. Yeah, so there's research that looks at what's called the pain of paying that does provide support for the idea that people will pay less when they're using cash. There are ways that this can be helpful, but you should also make sure to know what you're spending that cash on. And that gets at another proven way to spend less money. You put that cash in envelopes. That's called the envelope method. So let's say you budgeted $50 for eating out in a month. You take that $50 and you stick it in an envelope, then you just write with a Sharpie on the envelope, eating out. And then when you spent that money, that's it. It's gone. And you do the same thing for clothes and groceries and anything else in your budget. And it might seem a little silly, like, come on, what's with all these envelopes? But it can actually work. Abby says there's a behavioral thing that goes on where we tend to respond to these limits. The envelope creates a physical partition that people really don't want to break past. So if this is all of the money that you've allocated towards the supermarket, you really don't want to sort of break into the next envelope to use additional money for your supermarket bills. But here's the thing. If we're too busy nickel and diming ourselves, though, getting to the store brand pasta, that only goes so far. So Michelle says, don't forget the big stuff. It's important to reassess the things that you spend the most money on, like your rents and your mortgage, and living what I needed, picking up food just because it was convenient and I didn't feel like cooking. I cut out my morning coffee. This sounds painful. Yeah, it was a lot of sacrifice, but I learned a lot about myself, about self-control, and it taught me to be more intentional with deciding how I'm going to spend my money. So in the first couple of months, I wiped out over $5,000 of my debt. Wait, $5,000 off that debt in just a couple of months. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And that amount that she found is not unusual. For someone making like a middle income salary to find that much in a couple months, that is totally doable from my experience. And Michelle says the other bonus here is that once the spending fast is over, you've learned what you can live without. Once you shut everything down, you go, okay, I really do want my cup of coffee. I really do want to go to the hairdresser. But you know what? I can bring in my lunch. That's like nothing to me. I can just make a quick sandwich and I'm good. So you start to only add back the things that matter to you. Marie did that, exactly that. And when we last talked to her, she'd paid off about half of that $40,000 in credit card debt in about a year. I mean, that is really fast. Now, there might be a moment when you come into a little extra money. Doesn't happen all the time in life, but it does happen. Maybe it's a bonus from work, your tax refund check, $500, $1,000. And it can be really tempting to just spend that on something fun. That's like our natural human instinct. And actually giving yourself little treats to reward yourself while you're paying off your debt, and doing something hard like that. There's research that shows that can be really motivating. That's a good idea. But if you get a big pile of money, and this is takeaway number 5, Abby says, don't blow it. Use that money to pay off your debt. There's some really interesting research by Zhenling Zhang, who looks at the case of bonuses, and what she finds is that people tend to be more likely to take out auto loans and purchase cars right after they receive a bonus. What she finds specifically is the fact that people who are buying cars right after receiving a bonus are more likely to default. So what Abby's saying is, not only are we likely to blow the extra money on a car, but we buy cars that we can't even afford with the extra money. So Abby says if you get a windfall, your tax return money, whatever it is, just resist that urge and use the money to make some really good progress towards paying down your debt. One of the most painful parts of being stuck in a pile of credit card debt is paying those punishing interest rates, right? I mean, like 20% interest, it's just painful. It's like you're bleeding money. It could be thousands of dollars when you have a lot of debt. It's just the worst. So there's this thing called debt consolidation. And here's how it works. Let's say you got a bunch of credit cards, you owe 30 grand on them, and the interest rates are all really high. You will obviously save money on interest if you can pay off at least a big chunk of that debt with a lower interest rate loan. And there are a lot of ways to do this. The balance transfer offer from another credit card or a personal loan, probably not as good an idea. Let's say it is. I would say that if you're putting a vacation on a card that you then have to pay off over time, that you can't afford that vacation. Yeah, that is one perspective. It's the right perspective. Because you did ask me. If I did. Part of Michelle's concern here is that these balance transfer checks have a 0% interest rate for a limited time. And after a year, whatever the deal is, the interest rate's going to go way up. And the industry makes money because people screw that up and get stuck with the high interest rate. What I do is I set up automatic payments from my checking account, so I'm sure to pay it off before that happens. And Abby, on the other hand, has more of my thinking on this. So she says, look, if you have credit card debt and you can lower the interest rate with no negative consequences, she says that is going to help you. Because essentially, you'll have less total debt to have to pay off over time. And so wouldn't you rather have to pay a lower bill than a higher bill? You definitely want to do your homework, though, when you're thinking about this debt consolidation thing and paying off one kind of debt with another loan. For example, there are a lot of times when it's not a good idea to consolidate student loan debt and medical debt, too. You usually do not want to pay off with some other kind of loan. We have a whole episode on medical debt, so definitely check that out if you're dealing with medical bills. There's tips for how to get hospitals to dramatically lower your bill, for example. So look, if this is sounding complicated, it's because some of it is. And when you're getting out of debt, there is a lot that you can do by yourself. But there are also times when things do get complicated. And if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're not sure the best way to go, this is our last tip, tip number 7. Sometimes getting some one-on-one help is a good call. So I'm a big believer in seeking out help and teaming up with people who can help you because this stuff is really hard. Michelle runs a debt counseling program at her local church, and she says if you're looking for a good counselor who you can trust, and that's important because there's a lot of get out of debt kind of scammy operations out there, she says it's good to go to a nonprofit. That's key, nonprofit. One good resource for that is the National Foundation for Credit Counseling. They have a website, nfcc.org, and you can type in your zip code there and they'll tell you where nonprofit counselors are near you. And finally, as you head down this road of getting out of debt, this exciting but hard road, whether you do the snowball or the avalanche, or you want to go hog wild and try the spending fast, Michelle says, before you do any of that, do this too. The most important thing you need to do when you have a lot of debt is to forgive yourself. Because you need to take that step first so that you lay the groundwork for success. If during the whole process you're beating yourself up, or if I had only known and I shouldn't have done this, you're just not going to gain a lot of ground because you're going to start off with a very negative approach to paying off your debt. Just say, you know what, life happens, I'm in this situation, and so now I've decided in my life that I'm going to take the steps to get out of debt. And that's where you should start first. You know, if Baron Munchausen had been all super negative and fearful when it comes to debt consolidation, it works for some, but most of them end up right back where they are because they haven't gone through the process of making sure they understand why they're in debt and that they shouldn't go back here again. And finally, our last tip, tip number 7, sometimes when things get really complicated, hard, you don't want to make the wrong decision, getting some one-on-one help is a really good call. Just make sure it's with a non-profit agency. So it helps to have someone or have a program that you can go to where it can encourage you to stay on that path. For more NPR Life Kit, check out our other episodes. There's one about how to journal and how to start running. We cover all kinds of things. You can find those at npr.org/lifekit. And if you love Life Kit and you want more, subscribe to our newsletter at npr.org/lifekit newsletter. If you've got a good tip about crushing debt, leave us a voicemail at 202-216-9823 or email us at lifekit@npr.org. This episode was produced by Sylvie Douglas. Megan Kane is the managing producer. Beth Donovan is the senior editor. Our digital editor is Beck Harlan, and our editorial assistant is Claire Schneider. I'm Chris Arnold. Thanks for listening. Black voters play a crucial role for any Democrat who seeks to win the White House, but some big divides amongst that bloc and some serious ambivalence could determine who is elected president this November. Listen now on the Code Switch podcast from NPR.